Here is a problem I see very commonly made in crypto. Most people are just winging it. They're simply just investing by feeling. That's true for what they invest in, but it's also true for how much is been invested. So people just think maybe a few $100s are okay. Others think I should go all in and potentially take a loan against my house. So the spectrum is huge. And there's no real idea of how to potentially quantify this, right? What would be an ideal allocation to, say, Bitcoin? Let's say you only stick with Bitcoin. You're not that interested in trading. You're just interested in Bitcoin and you're wondering, should I invest $100? Should I invest $10,000? What actually makes sense? Traditional finance has figured this out somewhat, right? They advise maybe take a fraction of your monthly income and put this aside into, say, the S&P 500. Right? So there's a lot of schemes where people simply just save based relative to the income monthly. But for crypto, that's not necessarily as easy if you don't want to ride those bear markets, right? If you're not okay to go down 80% and you want to do somewhat of market timing, then it becomes a bit more complex. Now, here is how I think about this. You have to think about the potential extremes. So probably investing $1 into Bitcoin isn't that great, but probably taking out a home equity loan also isn't that great. So the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Now, why are those two extremes not ideal? The $1 position is not ideal because you will not profit enough from the upside, right? You might think, I was the one that bought into Bitcoin, maybe all my friends did not. I was smart enough to make that bet, but in the end you didn't profit much from it, right? You turned $1 into 3 maybe. So that's the issue why you don't want to go very small. Why don't you want to go ultra high on the allocation? It's because of the potential downside, right? There is, of course, the fear of loss, but there's also a very justified reason to not expose yourself to that much volatility. Let's say you take on that home equity loan and you buy all that Bitcoin with it. What could potentially happen? The Bitcoin price could go down. Maybe you use your job at the same time. You can't cover the mortgage payments anymore or those home equity loan payments anymore. Now you've got to sell the house, right? That's the worst case scenario. And you don't want to necessarily expose yourself to that risk, even though you might have a strong conviction in Bitcoin. So what's then ideal? So let's work with those extremes, right? The ideal is that you still feel like you benefited adequately from the upside in case we go up, but at the same time, you don't get wrecked in case we go down. So you don't want to end up looking at the Bitcoin price all the time, right? You don't want to fear that we go down. You rather want to be potentially even motivated to buy more in case we go down. And so there's a balance to be made here, and that's why it's so individual. Some people have very high incomes. Some people have very long careers ahead of them. Some people have already saved up a lot. And those kind of people can obviously take on more risk. Those kind of people won't be that afraid to see a drop of, say, $10,000 to their wealth. But others that are barely scraping by, they can't afford to lose $100. So you have to look at your own position. You have to look at what would I feel comfortable with going down, at least temporarily. If you're okay to drop 50% or maybe even 60% compared to your purchase price in Bitcoin, you're okay to see that drop of, translated into dollars of, say, $10,000, and just buy that Bitcoin, right? Buy it and potentially double down in case we go down. But if that's not the case, right? If you couldn't buy the bottom, or if you would not feel well with that drop, and you would potentially panic sell, then you're obviously over allocated. So there's a balance to be made, as in how much risk can I expose myself to versus how much potential gain could I realize.
Here are the videos that work on YouTube. XRP will be $12,000 guaranteed, or an AI explosion, top 3 cryptos to buy in November. A lot of pushing of greed, that's what gets the clicks. What doesn't get the click is a tutorial on how to make backtests, on how to build those sheets that in the end figure out what historically worked well in the past. The backtest that I often show here on this channel. I still very much enjoy producing this kind of content though. I also share these kinds of sheets, but I don't do it on YouTube. You also get direct access to me. Feel free to check it out. It's thebitcoinstrategy.com.
And so with that in mind, we come to a very interesting aspect about money. Money has decreasing marginal utility. As in, if you don't own a lot of money, if you don't have a lot of money and you're worried about the next bill, then $100 are super valuable to you. If you have already tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, then the additional, say, $100 doesn't mean much to you anymore, right? Of course, it's still money, but if you drop by $100, it's not that important. So potentially, if you're completely settled already, right? If you've got your house paid off, if you've got very stable cash flow, and this is all just funny money to you, you can completely randomly risk it because the marginal utility of your money is already so flat that even an additional, say, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in swings wouldn't make much to you. Then of course, feel free to bet this all, right? So the lower you are on this spectrum of wealth, so to speak, so normally you would measure this relative to your expenses or relative to your income, not just in US dollars. If you have already, say, 2 or 3 years saved up, you can of course risk much more than if you only have 1 or 2 months saved up. Because again, marginal utility, right? You get under way more stress if you're dropping, say, from 3 months to 1 month of saving, and if you were to drop, say, from 3 years to 1 year of saving. It's still not great, but the overall quality of life wouldn't decrease that much. You wouldn't necessarily freak out, which is very different to when you're pretty much close to bankruptcy. So one way to look at this is also with target allocations, right? You can think about how much volatility can I stomach? How much wealth do I currently have? And how much am I willing this wealth to fluctuate for in the end to get long-term returns? And everybody feels, of course, differently about this. And you have to consider Bitcoin can go down 60, 70, sometimes even 80%. And then the question is, are you okay with that fluctuation? You're probably okay to fluctuate from $1 to 20 cents, right? But you're not okay potentially to fluctuate from $100,000 to 20,000. So simply just think about this in terms of what's the worst case? Could I bear the worst case? And if the answer is yes, if the answer is even, I would even buy more in case we fluctuate that much down, then you're properly allocated. So yes, this is not just a hard number. Yes, this is not just a mathematical equation that you can follow. This is still somewhat subjective, but it's reasonable, right? It's reasonable that some people might be okay with more risk, others are not. That's in the end what's called the risk aversion or the risk tolerance. Simply think about this in terms of the worst case and think about this in terms of what's my potential upside. And simply weigh those two things. How much risk tolerance do you have? How hungry are you for the upside? How much can you risk? And always assume that the worst could happen, because at some point it probably will, right? Markets never go up forever. So at some point you will go through that crash and you will actually have to buy that dip. And if you're then over allocated because you were too courageous, then that's obviously a problem. And hopefully you don't have to learn this by experience, but maybe just a video like this is sufficient. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish videos regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. See you next time. Cheers.